Good afternoon. Thank you, Rishi. I appreciate that kind introduction. I've been in Washington, D.C. for a total sum of about 15 minutes now. Just got off the train, but it's a pleasure to be here and want to thank Project Indian American Impact on everything they do. This is a consequential conference, not just for the local community, but really the national South Asian Indian American community, raising the bar and making sure that we know that representation matters. So just a little bit about my story and some kind of takeaways in terms of my journey into politics. I arrived in the city of Hoboken, where I'm currently the mayor there. I'm in my second term, about 25 years ago. And what I think, if you're thinking about getting involved in politics as an organizer, a campaign staff, or a candidate, my experience has been, what our former House Speaker Tip O'Neill said, is that all politics is local. So what I did was I looked at my community, and I didn't really necessarily look at that as the South Asian community or the Indian or the Sikh community, but just the people in my neighborhood. And I saw how I can impact my community, meaning my neighborhood in Hoboken. And you can do that in New Jersey by running for a very hyper-local form of office called a committee man or committee woman. Now it's called committee person. And that is like literally representing a few blocks in your neighborhood. People don't even know that position, that elected position exists. So oftentimes they're vacant positions. But I thought that the best way to sort of like get involved and understand how politics works is to, start at that level. So I ran for committeeman in 2007, ran unopposed, but still made sure I knocked on every door within the district that I was in. It was a district within a ward of Hoboken, and kind of explained what the purpose of a committeeman was, or a committee person, which was to look at issues in the neighborhood and figure out, working with our ward council members, how to solve those issues. These are not issues like climate change or reproductive rights, or health care. It's like a stop sign at an intersection. It's, bird droppings in a park. This is not stuff that's going to make you passionate necessarily, but in your neighborhood, people are passionate about these issues, I've come to learn. And it's an area where you can make a difference and make a difference at a local level. And that was kind of like my introduction into politics, and it gave me a sense of how the system works, who the personalities are in your community. And you'll come to know, if you don't already know, that politics is very personality driven. So through that process of becoming a committee man, I learned the so-called landscape politically. And I realized that there were actually opportunities to make a difference at a higher level. In Hoboken at the time, the government was sorely mismanaged. Our property taxes went up 70% in 1 year. We had a fiscal monitor. Our junk bond status, our credit rating was junk bond status. And the mayor overspent the budget by $12 million. People wanted change. So I decided to run for office, for city council now, which is being your local council member. And people said, look, how many Sikhs live in Hoboken? And I said 4. They said 4%. I said, no, actually 4. It's me, my wife, and my brother and his wife. And Hoboken, as if you might know, it's a very, very Italian city, home of Frank Sinatra, Buddy Valastro. There's a large Latino population as well. So they said, look, how many Indians live in Hoboken? I said, well, not many, maybe 100 or 2, possibly. They said, look, you seem like a nice guy, but you're not Italian. This is an Italian city. You're not Latino. You're not Irish. You're not from labor. You're not a senior. Who's going to pull where are you going to pull your votes from? Like, who's going to vote for you? Somebody said, look at your appearance, not to discredit you, but you not for nothing, but you wear a turban and beard, and that's not going to go unnoticed in this election. And he didn't mean that as a compliment. He meant to say that there was an inherent conflict between being a Sikh and being an American in elected office and being a successful American in elected office. I didn't know if that was true or not because there weren't many examples at the time of other South Asian or Sikh elected officials. And I lived in a city where the population of South Asians and Sikhs was very small, as I just mentioned. But I didn't run as a Sikh candidate. I just ran as a candidate who happened to be from a certain background. And I talked about the issues that people care about, fiscal responsibility, which was hugely important at that time, making sure our infrastructure was strong, making sure that we had opportunities for our youth, making sure our schools were strong. If you can articulate persuasive policy positions on those issues, out of 12 candidates in 2009 in that election, as a first-time candidate, I was the highest vote getter. So that just speaks to, the fact that you should not be shy to enter the arena if you live in a community that is not diverse in the South Asian or Indian sense, because if you are competent and qualified, you have a shot, and I'm evidence of that. The same thing happened when I ran for mayor. I served on the council for 8 years, council president for 2 years. People said, you're unelectable. Councilman's nice, nothing's wrong with him, but really, Hoboken is not ready for a Sikh mayor, This is essentially an Italian city. So unelectable was like that whisper campaign. And we just kind of applied that same formula of just working hard that, as our culture tells us, we that's what we do to be successful as Americans. And that got me elected. Not once, but on my re-election, I ran unopposed, and the reason why that's significant is because Hoboken is, the politics there is like a blood sport. It's not for the faint of heart. Everyone wants to be the mayor. It's a strong mayor form of government, so I run the city, and my administration runs the city and has outsized authority compared to the city council. So that's why being mayor in Hoboken is not like, I think some towns or cities have a council that rotates the mayor or a town manager. We have what's called a strong mayor form of government. And running for re-election after the pandemic unopposed was remarkable because everyone runs for mayor because everyone wants to be a mayor in Hoboken, and to just apply good government, to go from junk bond status to being rated with S&P and Moody's, now AA+, the second highest ranking that a municipality can achieve. Like having that economic turnaround, not running as saying, hey, I'm the Indian guy, and or hey, I'm the Sikh guy, and these are my values, and but just doing a good job, being an honest public servant and executing on what you've promised during the election is all you need to do to be successful in elected politics. And I ran for re-election unopposed, and that was the first time in 100 years that a mayor of the city of Hoboken ran for re-election unopposed. So if you look at the trajectory, in the beginning they're saying I was unelectable, and on a re-election I was unopposed, and that's kind of like the story that many of us can apply here as possible candidates if you just simply believe in yourself. I will say, just reading from my notes, that a couple of tips is that, first is start small. Second is, in politics, relationships matter. So you have to take the time. When I wanted to become chairman of the Democratic Committee in Hoboken, the Democratic Party in Hoboken, I had to call those local committeemen that I was a committeeman at one point as well. And you have to call them, you have to meet them, you have to look them in the eye. Text and Twitter and social media, I know that's the trend right now, but politics is very relationship driven. Just never forget that. It's very, having that meeting with somebody, having that connection when you need support, it's a psychological thing where you need to take the time to have the meetings, to make the calls, to have the conversations, to listen to other people, to develop and cultivate the relationships that you need to do. You're not going to be able to do it on email. You're not going to be able to do it in text. You've got to have that actual connection. Lastly, I would just say that family support is essential. I'm running for Congress right now. The election is in 18 days. We are in a dogfight. We are in a dead heat in the polls. We don't know what's going to happen, but we are going to try our darnest to make history on June 4th. But I could not do anything without the support of your spouse, if you have a spouse. So make sure if you don't have that family support, whether it's your spouse or sibling or parents or whatever that community is, you should think carefully about running for office, because in my experience, I would not have been able to do anything that I've done without having that family support that starts with my wife, goes to people like my brother and my parents, and that support system in politics is very important. If they're checked out, if they don't care, it impacts your life at home, and it's not the best recipe for running for office. I'm just gonna that's just a kind of like advice I'd have for you is that in my experience is very important. But just in conclusion, there's nothing special about me. I'm like a regular person. If I can do this, like stand up here as a two-term mayor and a congressional candidate who might be on the verge of being in the U.S. Congress, anybody in this room can do it, because there's nothing special about me. I'm an ordinary person who just wants to do good in this society. And if you also are an ordinary person who just wants to make your community better in this country, the sky's the limit. Being an Indian American is a source of strength, because I think our values teach us to move our communities in the right direction, no matter what city or town you live in. And if you ever need advice from me, I'm always here as a resource, and we should all see each other as resources for each other in the future. So again, I just want to thank everyone for having me, and leave the rest to this esteemed panel as well. So I'm sure they have a lot of value in that as well. So thank you very much. Appreciate it.
To introduce myself, Paul Kim Bradfield, Southern Regional Director at Run for Something. And if you're unfamiliar with Run for Something, we're a national organization that supports young people to run for state and local office. If you're upset with the age of the leadership of this country, this is an organization to support, both in building a bench for future leaders, but also supporting young people that want to make a difference in their own communities. Maybe you step into office because you have ultimately higher aspirations, but also the power of that local office to make a difference. Sometimes we like to say that the further down the ballot you go, the closer you get to people's front doors. The mayor talked about the issues of a stop sign or a school board, or the things that impact Americans on a day-to-day basis, much more influenced by the local representatives. And Run for Something, through its history, has supported and endorsed thousands of candidates, including over 250 candidates who are AAPI. And of those, 66 candidates who've identified as South Asian or Desi Americans, 34 of which who've won their elections. It's we're not a yeah. We're one thing I love about working for Run for Something is we back candidates that are that we don't have traditional viability metrics. We back candidates are running tough elections, that are running in conservative communities, that are running for the first time as a candidate that someone like them has never run before in that seat. And also this year we're backing 15 candidates of the South Asian Desi community as well. So a little bit about me. I think it's boring. Something's far more interesting is to hear from our panelists. First question is, could you please tell us a little bit about yourself and what compelled you to decide to run for something? And if you could even highlight the moment that you decided, this is what I'm gonna step up and do this.
Sure.
Please share that as
Great,
well.
thank you. Thank you for sponsoring and Act Blue as well for having us here. And thank you for Impact for continuing to put this summit on. I feel like every year it's like coming back to a high school reunion and checking in on everyone and what they're up to. And I'm still a state rep. I'm coming in from Michigan. I'm also the majority whip. Some people don't know what the majority whip does. If you don't, you can watch House of Cards on Netflix if you get some time. But you know why I ran for office? It's very clear in my mind. My story is unfortunately born out of tragedy. My parents immigrated to this country in the late 60s, early 70s. And those two lovebirds moved here and could have settled anywhere between sunny San Diego and New York or Hoboken, and they picked Racine, Wisconsin, of all places. And so I was born out there many years later, and you know, like many immigrants at that time, there wasn't a lot of people that looked like them, and they were just really impactful in kind of setting up and building a community. And I think that's where I learned a lot of that firsthand. And so my parents actually established the first Sikh Gurdwara, or place of worship, out in Wisconsin. And many years later, fast forward, we had moved out of Wisconsin by then, and it was 2012. I found myself working for President Obama. And it was August of 2012, unfortunately, when a white supremacist walked into that same Sikh Gurdwara in Oak Creek, Wisconsin, opened fire. Out of hate and ignorance, and thinking he was walking into a mosque, and killed 6 beautiful souls that day. And you know, for people who immigrated in that generation, you know, like my parents' story, I think is similar to many, where they mortgaged everything they had and bought 2 one-way tickets and came here, and they left a lot of their family behind. And so the people that you immigrated with in those days almost became your pseudo family, because that's who you were celebrating birthdays and anniversaries and holidays with. And so, you know, the temple president was one of those individuals that was very close to our family, along with several others. And so, you know, our country has a gun violence epidemic, which is a separate conversation. But, you know, as we're numb to some of those stories we hear in the news, when you go on to CNN.com and you see, you know, aunties and uncles that you grew up with crying and in tears, it hits very different. And that horrific story was painful enough, but it was actually the aftermath of that which compelled me to run. So, you know, like I said, I was working for Obama. We were based out in Chicago. I went up to Wisconsin and was kind of involved in some of the steps afterwards. And, you know, to use CNN.com, for example, you know, after the incident happened, it was the main headline on CNN.com. And you know how they get really dramatic about their headlines, and it was like shooting. But after just a couple hours, it was relegated to subtext. And within, you know, by midnight, it was off the front page. I think because there was unfortunately another shooting somewhere else, in Kansas or something. But how that kind of, I internalized that was very impactful for me, because that was my family's American story of immigrating here, building a life, you know, doing it kind of quote unquote the right way, setting up a platform for my brother and me to succeed, and it wasn't even worth a 12-hour cycle in the national headlines. And so in that moment was that seminal moment where I realized that the community's voice, and, you know, as the mayor mentioned, when we say community, you know, it's a very broad term and can mean many different things, but there's so many communities whose voice has been marginalized, you know, in the political process and in the national media. And that was the moment when I realized that I wanted to expand my platform to do more. And so finished that up, moved to Michigan, and, you know, the rest is kind of history from there. But yes, excited with where we're going now, and I guess full circle in my second term now in the Michigan House. our party, the Democratic Party, took a trifecta for the first time in 40 years. And so one of my first orders of business was to pass common sense gun reform, which is the reason that I ran for office in the first place. And so it was nice to see that full circle moment. But again, thank you for having me.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all for being here to be a part of this conversation. I have to say, 10, 15 years ago, growing up, this was not a conversation I think that would be easily had in our communities because it wasn't a world that many Asians thought about being a part of. I have to say, I never planned to be a part of the political spectrum in this way or running for office. Honestly, one of my friends always jokes with me that the reason I ran for office is because I never wanted to pay off my medical school bills. But in reality, it was really being a part of the medical field that made me realize that I needed to be at the table. I went into medicine wanting to help really my community, which was a very indigent community in northwestern Iowa, where I grew up. Many of you may have heard of Steve King, who was ranked as one of the most conservative people that has ever served in Congress, and he was there for 16 years. I grew up in Steve King country. And it was a district that people were suffering from many different issues. They were suffering from lack of mental health resources. We still are dead last in the country when it comes to per capita mental health resources. They're struggling from not having access to even basic forms of care because we have done so many things that have shuttered clinics and hospitals in those areas. We are a state that just passed an abortion ban last year that is currently on injunction in the courts, and we're waiting for the Supreme Court to come out with their decision in June. It was in the face of all of this that I realized when I have a patient come and see me in the clinic, what good am I if I can't get them the care they need and they're telling me about suicidal ideation? If they can't afford food for their families that night, and I'm sitting here telling them, oh, your blood pressure's a little high, what does that matter? So it was really about trying to change the systems in which we all function. And there wasn't a single doctor in our legislature. There hadn't been a single physician in our state house in decades. But yet, the biggest thing they legislate on and spend money on is health care. And they don't do it by seeking out expertise. They do it based on their gut instinct because once they get into office, a lot of people assume they're experts on everything. And so I wanted to be at that table. I wanted to be at that table to stand up for my community and to make the system in which my community lived more hospitable for everyone. And so that's why I ran. And it was really being a part of that conversation was far different than anything I had imagined. And I think every single elected official who has spoken or I've met throughout my time in coming to Impact, there is a very similar thread about being told that there are certain demographics that run. There are certain demographics that are successful when they run. And that's even coming from your own party as Democrats. And we prove them wrong. We prove them wrong time and time again. And so don't ever let that ideal demographic be the reason you don't run. Because what we really need is your voice at the table because more people in your community, in your state, look like you than you realize. Asians are one of the fastest growing populations in this country, but we don't have a seat at the table often enough, and we can change that together. And we have. So my first run, I lost by 300 votes, less than 1%. And that was without any support. My second run, I ran against, and I don't know what it is, maybe we just like running against Italians as Indians, because I also ran against an Italian whose family had been entrenched there for generations. They had all been in politics at the state level, worked in the governor's office. I was not supposed to win that race. They were millionaires. His brother-in-law actually was the director behind the Marvel movies. Wow. And so he spent about $2.3 million on a primary. And we spent far, far less than that. But we still won. Grassroots support. We did the grassroots work, and we had support from organizations like Impact and people in this room. And it makes a difference. And so I'm in my first term. I'm nearing the end of my first term, running for re-election. And we went from not supposed to being at the table to being unopposed now. So I want to see so many other people in this room take those same steps. And there's a lot of allies, even if it seems like you have dissenters, there are a lot of allies throughout this country, many of whom you'll meet in this conference, that are happy to sit down, chat with you, and tell you why you need to do this and that you can. So thank you all for being here.
Wow, I really shouldn't have chosen to sit at the end of this table. My name is Sophia Anwar. I am a former candidate for the Denton Central Appraisal Board. If you don't know what that is, that's okay. Most of my county didn't either, and most of my state didn't either. It is a newly created elected position, and it's about the most exciting thing that you'll ever care about, property taxes. And I think my story is a little bit different in that I always wanted to run. And I'm not afraid to say that. I always wanted to run because I've always worked in government. And every time that I applied for every single job in government, whether it was to the White House, whether it was work for a state rep, whether it was for a member of Congress, every time I applied, people who knew me my whole life, best friends of mine would say, I don't think it just works like that. Like, I don't think you can just apply for these positions. And I did, and then I held those positions. And the thing that I found when I held those positions is that they're just a bunch of other people, just like me, just like you, running this country. And what I learned is there are people who are doing things, and maybe they're doing them better than I am right now. But it's not because they're subject matter experts or that they have some degree that's better than mine. They've simply been doing it longer. That's it. My daughter is 4.5 years old. She's not great at tying her shoes. I'm better at it than she is. But it's not because, for any other reason, that I've been doing it longer than she has, and that's it. So I think what I have found through my entire process, like I mentioned, I'm a former candidate, so I did not win my first election, but it is not going to be my last election, I can promise you that. And I want you all to bring that same energy. Like, literally every single person in this room is qualified to run. Because your personal lived experience that you have makes you a subject matter expert on your lived experience. I looked at myself and thought, okay, I'm 32, I'm a mom, my daughter's gonna start public school, I own a house, I pay property taxes. Oh, it looks like I'm qualified to run for this position. And I had people ask me, like, why are you running? Are you qualified? And I would mention those things, and I'd say, and for those exact reasons, you should be making sure that you earn that I earn your vote, or that my opponent earns your vote. And I really loved everything that the mayor mentioned earlier. It's all about those relationships. I can't tell you, I would walk into the most conservative candidate forums where literally I would text my mom, like, I'm a little bit nervous about being here. And she would even call me and say, like, maybe you guys should like carpool on your way there and carpool on your way back, because it was a little bit scary. I'm not gonna lie. But I had folks who came up to me right after and said, while shaking my hand, looking me in the eye, I only vote for Christians. And I said, thank you. Thanks so much for hearing from me today. And I prayed to God that it didn't rain, and thankfully it didn't. So I hope you heard both of our prayers. And I just kept moving on. And those same people would email me and say, thank you for coming. This was a Republican public, forum. I appreciate you coming out. I liked everything you said. It made sense. I'm going to vote for you. So I think you'll never know who is or isn't voting for you. Now, again, like I mentioned, I did not win my first election, but I earned over 18,000 votes in a place that I did not, and I still do not know 18,000 people, right? So you just never know who is someone who's going to listen to you and say, you make sense. So don't overcomplicate it. Be very genuine and share your story. My dad owns a hardware store, right? Like, I've learned community from him. Every person who walked through his store was fixing their toilet, had a kid who had a new hobby that they were fixing a fence from, or a wife who wanted to do renovations in her home. So we knew everything that was happening within our community. And it was from him that I learned the power of like a local chamber of commerce, being friends with the local police officer and your local school teacher. And I think that's all politics really is, and continuing to stay involved. So when you pour into organizations like your local chamber, your kids' schools, your local community, when you do decide to run, if and when you do, which I hope you all do, this is a muscle we all need to be exercising like year after year, they'll all pour back into you. So I just want you to know, like, everything you're doing now is working to build your community, and if you are genuine in that, your community will see you.
Thanks.
But I feel like one of the existential fights we're fighting is who belongs in this country, but also who should have access to the positions making the decisions in this country. And if we're not stepping up to run and diversifying that representation, we're allowing those decisions to be made by the traditional power structures that exist in this country. So I think there's a consistent theme of all the people that we've heard of so far of stepping up to run even when they were faced with a lot of skepticism, even including on our side of the aisle, whether they should be qualified. And I'll say, if you're in this room, you're qualified to run for something, absolutely. And so we touched on the why. I would love to get into the how of this next question. I was actually at another panel at the summit, and I heard a line, stories heal hearts and change minds. So the question is, how did your story, what you bring, who you are, the experience that you have, how did that inform how you did your campaign? We talked about why you got in. How did your story influence, impact, inform how you conducted your campaign?
So I was that child in school that on my report cards, my teachers always said, cannot stop talking in class. So I was always the one who was striking up conversations. I could talk to a door. And it served me well in medicine because I just get to sit there and talk to my patients and hear their story. I'm also the doctor that's probably going to annoy you because I'm going to be running an hour late because I'm going over on every appointment. But that worked well for me when I was running for office because now I just got to go knock on doors, learn about people in my community, many of whom, some of them have been my teachers, some of them I'd gone to school with growing up, and I just hadn't seen them in a long time. Some of them knew my parents, and they were like, hold on, Srinivas, there's not many people that look like you around here. You've got to be related. And it was just getting to meet everybody and hear what mattered to them. And that was just so much fun to me. I got to learn so much about people who I have known for years that I had no idea they were facing issues or what their values were that aligned with mine. And it was really that door knocking that pushed us over because when we got outspent 10-1, it's those personal connections that you make with individuals that make them realize who they want to vote for, even if you're not the one that's flooding the airways because you don't have that money. It's the people that they build that relationship with, as the mayor mentioned. It's all about that feeling like you can be heard. And it was being able to do that really enabled me to run for office.
Yeah, I think absolutely. I think nothing replaces like ground game, and I think there's always going to be a party or a person who can outspend you, but they're not going to outwork you. And I think knowing that you have to be the hardest worker for your run. I think that's a lot of times I think folks don't necessarily realize that, and they're hoping that like the team will carry them. The team is not going to carry you. You have to set the pace for your team. And that family support that the mayor was mentioning too. Like, I mean, I had my parents at like separate polling locations greeting folks, and my county is really silly in that early voting you can vote anywhere, but on election day you can only vote at your polling location, which means people were coming to the wrong one. And then I would say, hi, there's another woman who looks a little bit older than me who's wearing the same shirt. You'll meet her. And I mean, my mom would send me selfies saying like, here's a woman who came to vote for you. And then she, so I think just making sure that you have your team to run. But I think like really tangible advice. I mean, I feel like this is really nice and it feels good, but tangible advice I would say is find people who've run before and ask them what their experience was. Like, I mean, literally sit there, pen and paper, be like, tell me what your experience was like. If you're willing and able to share, tell me some things that worked for you and didn't, and who can I talk to? I think you have to make those outreaches early, and then understand yourself what your why is too. Like, make sure you know, because people want to know why you want to run. And again, if you're not genuine, they're not going to want to support you. And I think when people see that, I mean, it's wild to see people who will donate their time and effort to door knock with you, and you have never met them before in your life. Like, I had one volunteer named Alan. I mean, God bless this man. He was 60 years old every Saturday from like 9 a.m. to like one, because I was like, I have to run. Like, my daughter was going to wake up from her nap. I mean, he would door knock with me, and we were such a good team. Like, I mean, we had a good pace going. And I would ask him all the time, like, I mean, I'm so grateful, clearly, but like, why are you doing this? You know, like, I'm just baffled. Like, I don't know you, you don't know me. And he's like, I just think you've got it. You know, and so it's like, you have to be genuine, you have to build those connections, and then follow up. Like, don't only reach out to people when you need something. Reach out to them, remember something about them, or reach out to them and make sure you show up everywhere. And continue to show up. I think that's also something that really happens when folks don't win their first time, which does happen. Hello, right here. You have to continue to keep showing up. So if you do decide to run that second time, people are like, yes, this person is not just here to run. They're here to build community, and they've been sticking around to build community. So make sure you invest. Again, you have to invest. And the more you pour out, all those different, streams will pour back into you.
Thank you. Running for office wasn't in the plan for me. I was a good Desi boy and got my MBA and was working in finance. Or I think I was a good boy. My mom still reminds me I'm not a doctor like Megan and my brother. But going to business school, I ended up approaching my campaign with kind of the framework that I learned in the corporate sector and really kind of turned it into a business case. And, I envisioned kind of the representation that I envisioned for that district was kind of brought forth into the plan of re-envisioning how we do things. And so there was a whole host of things that we did that just was contrary to how my predecessors and the institution, broadly speaking, had approached those things. And so we were routinely told, hey, are you sure you want to do this? But I live in a district that's actually the most rapidly diversifying district in the state of Michigan, made up largely of immigrant communities from all over the world. And there were dozens of conversations that we had in our campaign where we would talk to people that said, we have lived here for decades, and this is the first time we've ever received outreach from a candidate or an elected official. And that was kind of the anecdotal evidence we needed to know that we were doing what we were setting out to do. And kind of fast forward, we ended up bringing thousands of new voters that help up and down the ballot and helped our party again, just make inroads in communities that has not been done before. And so a lot of that was kind of trusting our gut because, when you decide to run for office, there's a number of great organizations out there, Run for Something included, and there's a couple others, but largely the trainings are made for Tom, Bob, and Harry. And there's not a lot for people named Ranjeev. And it was very important for me to run on my ethnic name and I bring that up because the consultants were like, hey, you need to shorten your name. It needs to be, a little bit more electable. And so there's not a blueprint of people you can call around the country at many locals, at any level of government to say, hey, how do you do this? And so it's been extremely important to me to continue to partner with organizations and other elected officials and candidates to provide a platform for communities that have been marginalized to be able to succeed. And so I think it's just really important to trust your gut. No one is going to understand your situation as much as you because you are putting the most time and effort into kind of holistically looking at all factors of what's going to go into the decisions you make on the campaign trail. And so everyone here is qualified to run. Everyone here is going to be a great candidate. And no one out there is going to care about your individual success as much as you are. And so trust your gut and you're able to do this.
Yeah. Thank you for all those answers. We're running short on time, so I'm going to get to one final question. But I do want to, the theme that I heard kind of through every answer is the importance of centering community and using your community and lifting up the community. And so the final question, what advice do you have for someone who is considering running for something? I feel like you have potentially a whole audience full of those
I guess
individuals.
I'm number one to start. If you're not already part of your community, go do that. Go do that. Before the whole, I want to run for something, go be part of your community. Your city, your town, your county has so many commissions and boards that are not exciting. So many. And I say that because truly, they're not exciting. And they're not meant to be. They're meant to be procedural. You're meant to go do the work. And what you do is you learn. You learn about the inner workings of your city. Go reach out to your mayor. I mean, I know I'm not like the average person when I do this. I've moved around a bunch. My husband's in medicine. Yes, I married someone in medicine. I'm not a doctor myself, but my mom says it's okay because I married someone who is. But every time I moved somewhere, you know what I did? I reached out to my mayor. They work for me. And I said, hi. I'd reach out to their secretary or their assistant and said, I'd like to meet with the mayor. And I would schedule a time to go down to town hall. And I would say, hi, I'm new here. What does this city have for me? No joke. And you should all be doing that. Like literally go make appointments to do that. And I would say, hi, I have a daughter. She's 4.5. Tell me about your libraries. What programs do you have that are free, aka my tax dollars pay for them, that my family should be accessing? There are so many resources that cities, states, federal government gives, but a lot of people don't know about them, right? I mean, I know that. I've been pushing a lot of federal funds, and hi, there's resources. No one's checking those out. And that's okay. But go to them. Go to them and bring your friends too, right? Like I said, I'm a mom, so a lot of my life outside of work is like birthday parties and baby showers. That's a lot of my social activity. That's the era of life I'm in. Embrace it. And I used to fight it at first. I hated bringing childcare issues. I don't live near my family, so it's like me and my husband to deal with all of it. And then I stopped fighting it. I would just bring her all my stuff with a coloring book. You know what happened? Candidates running for constable, mayor, city council, they would start coloring with my daughter. Because we're all just people running for these things. So please be involved in your community. Like I said, there's commissions and boards that you can go. Start attending city council meetings, school board meetings. You don't have to be at every one, but just start showing up. You'll notice that there's like the same 10 people at every single one of them. Go introduce yourself. They'll see you 2-3 times. They'll be like, hey, tell me what you're interested in. Pick 2-3 things you're interested in. Relate them to your life. Next time there's an event, you know what they're going to do? They're going to call you for it. And then in 2-3 months, when there's like a new volunteer unpaid position where you have to dedicate your time and resources, you know what they're going to do? They're going to call you. That is it. There is no secret sauce. It's just work, showing up, and volunteering. If you do that, then you can go run for office. That is the only prerequisite, in my opinion.
I just want to say something on that. When we were talking about the coloring book, the young lady had a couple of kids. What they did was the kids draw the yard signs. The whole bunch of kids made the yard signs and she won, which is amazing.
Great.
All the kids got involved and they made the yard signs and they made a big impact. And it was a nice idea, and then the kids started doing it, all friends and volunteered and made all these yard signs.
That's awesome.
It's a great tip. I think I saw a lot of people taking notes. My advice is just to do it. Not in the sense of just kind of jumping in blind, but I think, running for office or getting involved in politics, just broadly speaking, is one of those things where you're never going to be able to line all your ducks in the row and feel completely comfortable. There's always going to be a sense of just uncertainty, and I think it's more important just becoming comfortable with the fact that there is uncertainties and things that you can't plan that are going to happen, and you're just going to have to be nimble enough to deal with it. And so, to the points I guess we were making earlier today, I think a lot of people, when they want to get involved, a lot of people's first gut reactions, I want to run for office, which is great, but I think a lot of people just don't know about all the different ways you can get involved. Equally important to running for office, we have a severe deficit of qualified staff and campaign side staff and support on that side. And then, every municipality has so many positions that are either appointed or go vacant. And it's really starting to just kind of research your individual situation and start building those relationships. I think that's one thing that we've talked about today. But as you start going to a lot of the meetings out there with your local Dem clubs or public service organizations, that respectfully exist, you will start seeing the same group of people and a lot of overlap, and you'll start quickly recognizing, what are the relationships that matter. And so when you do, I guess, decide to take the plunge into the deep end and file some paperwork and run for office, you want to do so from a position of strength if possible. It's tough to be kind of going against the system if you don't have to. And so, relationships can help like that, with that. And I think, as the mayor mentioned, kind of starting from the ground up, so to speak, I think is kind of invaluable and priceless advice, because I see a lot of talented people that really just want to shoot straight to the top, so to speak. And I unfortunately, and if it doesn't work out, they get kind of dissuaded from wanting to do this, and they leave the system altogether. And you just think how much talent was kind of left off the table because of just a decision to maybe run for the wrong office at the wrong time. And so I think it's prudent to do a little bit of research. I guess it's contradictory to my initial advice of saying just do it, but just do it after you do some research, and things will work out.
Be with Desi and do your research.
Yeah.
I mean, what they've both said is exactly on par. I agree with everything they've both said. I will emphasize those things, but then add on, be an individual. Don't be scared to be you. I got told when I was running for office, I sometimes wear kurta tops on top of jeans, and it's just what I like to wear. I got them in India, I enjoy them. Some people buy the exact same thing from Nordstrom, but because they're white, it doesn't stick out as anything unusual. I got told by one very, very good Democrat, I like you, I like your policies, you just don't need to rub your culture in my face. I did it anyway. I continued to do it. So be you. Number one thing, because voters sense sincerity. And if you are not being you at the doors, if you're not being you in speeches, they don't know if they can believe you and who you're going to be as an elected official, if you're just going to be another politician. So just always be true to yourself. Second part, when it comes to trying to set up who you're going to run for office, while it's important to be involved in your community, don't let longevity of those relationships get in your way. I had always been a volunteer in my community, and I had actually just recently moved back after my training. So it had been a while since I'd really been rooted there, and I didn't know the current Democratic leaders in my small community. And I got to know them by running for office, asked them to be in my kitchen cabinet, and we've built some really strong relationships that way, and they were some of the best advisors I ever had. So longevity isn't always the limiting factor. I reached out to some of them blindly and said, hey, you don't know me. I'm really interested in running for this. Can you sit down and have a coffee with me? And by the end of that coffee, they were now part of my cabinet. And they just had a lot of knowledge to give. Because a lot of these people are not necessarily people who want to run for office themselves. They are not people who have worked necessarily in politics, but they've been longtime volunteers. They write postcards. They know how to help turn out the vote. They know how to poll watch. They have all that knowledge that is so valuable, but often overlooked by the overall elected scheme of leaders. And so those are the people to reach out to, gain their knowledge, get them on your side, and have them be early supporters who then tell you, hey, you really need to go talk to this person because they control the whole senior citizen vote. Just go play cards with him one day, right? They have that inside knowledge. And so that's who you want on your kitchen cabinet as well. And the third thing is never overlook a potential voter because of who they are registered to support in the past. One of the biggest issues with our current political system, and especially with the party structure, is we often try to appeal to the same voting base over and over again. And you have what we call Dem scores if you're in the Democratic Party and Vote Builder, and you're always told only knock down to this certain Dem score. I knocked every door. Independents, Republicans, I knocked every door. And there were times that not just sometimes, actually a lot of times where there was a Trump sign and a Megan sign right next to each other. And that's because they just don't want to be ignored. They just want to feel like somebody's talking to them at the local level, cares about their issues. So don't rule out those people who you think, oh, they support the other side, or, oh, they aren't typical voters. Reach out to them and figure out what it is that you connect on, and you can often still get them to be your supporter.
Very awesome answers, high quality answers. I would recommend if you're interested in running for office, definitely speak to our panelists after this, and also you can go to wherecanirun.org, put in your address, and it'll spit out all the offices that you're eligible to run for based on your address.